Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Political Excess. Taking another quick break from the midterm coverage, and I got another hypothetical 2024 presidential matchup. This time it is going to be Sherrod Brown for the Democrats and Glenn Youngkin for the Republicans. Obviously, it's very unlikely this will happen, but we're just trying to have some fun and play it out anyway. A lot of these margins would depend on the national environment at the time, so some of these states could definitely go either way. I think Sherrod Brown would probably have a reasonable working class appeal. He would probably be his weakest when confronted with the modern fringes of the Democratic Party in regards to social or cultural issues. Glenn Youngkin would do better in the suburbs, but he's probably going to have less working class appeal than someone like Sherrod Brown. Let's get into this anyway, and safe states are over a 10-point margin, likely states 5 to 10 points, lean under 5 points, and tilt 1 point or less. Let's start in Alaska, and that will be safe for Youngkin. Not much to say about this state. It would be very low double digits. It could potentially get down to 8 or 9 points. That's a possibility. Let's move on to Hawaii. That will, of course, be safe for Sherrod Brown. West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, very safe for Sherrod Brown. I don't think Glenn Youngkin would get under 10 in Washington or Oregon, but if it's any consolation, I do think he would get it under 20. Nevada, that's a tricky one, but that is a tilt for Sherrod Brown. It's more working class, and even if it does trend a little bit to the right, I think Glenn Youngkin would have less appeal there than Sherrod Brown. Idaho and Utah, safe for Youngkin. Arizona, that is a lean for Youngkin. I think Youngkin would have enough appeal to get a lot of those former McCain type of voters out there, and he'd win that by low single digits. Montana and Wyoming, safe for Youngkin. Colorado, that'll be likely for Brown. I'm thinking at least mid-single digits there, probably high single digits, 8 or 9 points. Youngkin is not as polarizing as someone like Donald Trump, so he's not going to completely get blown out in a place like Colorado. However, I also think Sherrod Brown would have a reasonable appeal there. New Mexico, that is likely for Sherrod Brown, probably 5 to 6 points. It's more working class. I don't see Youngkin having a ton of appeal in a place like New Mexico, but again, it would also not be a blowout. North Dakota, South Dakota, safe for Youngkin. Nebraska at large is safe for Youngkin. And the 2nd District with Omaha, that will be a tilt for Sherrod Brown. With redistricting, it has gotten a little bit redder. I think Youngkin is, of course, going to have some suburban appeal, but on a presidential level, I still think Brown edges it out. Kansas and Oklahoma, safe for Youngkin. How about in Texas? That will be likely for Glenn Youngkin. Youngkin will do well in a lot of the deep red counties, and he won't do so bad in the suburbs. Sherrod Brown would do well in the blue cities, but I think it would still stay red with about a 7 to 8 point margin. Up in Minnesota, that will be likely for Brown. Probably mid-single digits. I think Youngkin would just not have enough appeal in those ancestral type of Democratic counties. Up in the Iron Range, places like that, they're going to definitely go for Sherrod Brown. Iowa, that will be likely for Glenn Youngkin. A place like Iowa will have just moved too far to the right culturally and socially for Sherrod Brown to be truly competitive. A couple of decades ago, Brown would do well, but I think at this point, Glenn Youngkin, he would do pretty well himself. Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, safe for Youngkin. Up in Wisconsin, that's a tough call, but that is a tilt for Glenn Youngkin. As we get into the Rust Belt, Sherrod Brown is going to have more appeal. I could definitely see Brown winning Wisconsin. He's going to do a little bit better in those rural areas, but Glenn Youngkin is also going to do a little bit better in the suburban red counties as well. I was torn on this, but I put it as a tilt for Youngkin. Illinois will be safe for Brown. Michigan, that'll be a lean for Sherrod Brown. Probably a 2 to 3 point margin. Michigan is not going to go deep blue like it used to, but Sherrod Brown is definitely going to have more appeal in a state like Michigan. Plus, it is from neighboring Ohio, where Sherrod Brown is from. I think Glenn Youngkin would do fine in the suburbs. I just think that rural vote would go a little bit more for Brown, and he would carry the state. Indiana, safe for Youngkin. Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama, all safe for Youngkin. Florida, that will be a lean for Glenn Youngkin. Florida has trended a little bit toward the right. Brown is not really a weak candidate, but I still think Glenn Youngkin would have the right kind of makeup to be able to carry Florida by a couple of points. Georgia, that's another very tough call. I went with a tilt for Glenn Youngkin. I think Youngkin does reasonably well, bridging the gap between the Trump voters and the suburban, former Romney-type voters. So the suburbs around Atlanta, he would win enough of those voters to be able to edge out a win by under 1 point. South Carolina, safe for Youngkin. North Carolina would be lean for Youngkin, probably only by a couple-point margin. Let's go over to Ohio. This would be Sherrod Brown's home state. How well would he do? I have it as a lean for Glenn Youngkin. On a presidential level, I think it's just trended too far to the right, even for someone like Sherrod Brown to win. He would definitely make it very close, probably low single digits. But as I said earlier, the cultural and social issues, I think those are going to be unappealing enough to where voters would definitely still support someone like Glenn Youngkin. If it was purely on economics, I think Sherrod Brown would win Ohio as well as many of these other states by wider margins. West Virginia, safe for Glenn Youngkin. Let's go up to Maine. At large, that will be safe for Sherrod Brown. But in the 2nd district, that will be a lean for Glenn Youngkin. He will still win that one electoral vote. It won't be by a wide margin because Sherrod Brown, his economic message would resonate enough in that 2nd district. Culturally, they have passed by the Democrats. But in this hypothetical, I think Brown would make it close but still lose. How about in New Hampshire? That I have as a lean for Glenn Youngkin. Probably only 1 or 2 points. I think Glenn Youngkin can do well in a state like New Hampshire, or at least slightly better than Sherrod Brown would. Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Washington, D.C., safe for Sherrod Brown. There's not much to say about these states. They were already pretty blue anyway. Sherrod Brown would do better in some of the rural areas. Glenn Youngkin would do better in some of the suburban areas, and it would all basically cancel each other out and go for Brown by over 10 points. How about in Pennsylvania? That would be a tilt for Sherrod Brown. And similar to what I just said, Glenn Youngkin would not do so bad in the Philadelphia suburbs, but Sherrod Brown would not do so bad in the rural Trump counties. And Brown would win this probably by just under 1 point. And finally, the last state is Virginia. That would be Glenn Youngkin's home state. And that I have as a lean for Sherrod Brown. Similar to Ohio, I think both of these candidates would lose their home state. Youngkin would get it down under 5 points. But at the end of the day, in regards to national politics, Virginia is just too blue. And Brown would pick up Virginia. And that is my map, and that would result in 276 electoral votes for Glenn Youngkin, 262 votes for Sherrod Brown. Glenn Youngkin would win a very narrow race. Several of these states are up for grabs and could go either way. The big unknown would be the national environment at the time, and the issues that are the most emphasized, I think if they're economic issues, Sherrod Brown would do a little bit better in more states, and I think if there are cultural, social issues, I think Glenn Youngkin would do better in more of these states. So it's hard to predict. You're probably going to disagree with a few of these states. That's fine. But this is what I came up with. And let me know down below in the comments. Do you agree with this map or do you disagree? Let me know down below. And if you enjoy this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.